Hello and welcome to this episode of Akrinos Access. I'm your host, Eric Matei, joined today by Mr. Evon Mendrin. Evon is a certified financial planner and certified student loan professional and is the founder of Optometry Wealth Advisors. And Evon's joining us for a conversation all around, well, look, it's one of the hottest topics in optometry right now. Given some recent changes, we're going to be talking about how to optimize your optometry student loan payoff under some of this new legislation. Evon, welcome to Akrinos Access.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
It's great to see you back, and I know we have got a whole lot of great things to get into here. Again, around this hot topic, given some recent changes around student loan legislation. So why don't we kick it all off with you just kind of giving everyone an update on exactly what is the latest news regarding student loans?
How much time we got, right? We're here for a couple hours, right? I mean, it's been a busy last couple months with student loans, and like you said, it's just been on everyone's minds. If you have federal student loans, because there's been so much happening, and really over the last 3 years, since March 2020, we've been dealing with uncertainty around federal student loans, and we've had a payment freeze and interest freeze that's been happening for 3 years. There's several final extensions of that. So that was a question of when those would restart. Fortunately, we have sort of a clear knowledge of that. In October 1st, those payments are going to restart again. So hopefully, viewers, if you've got those loans, hopefully you're planning for those to be a part of your life and your cash flow once again. One of the major things that happened recently is something we've been waiting on for a while is the Supreme Court ruling around federal loan cancellation. And the Biden administration had announced a program to forgive or cancel $10,000 to $20,000 of federal debt. That, as expected, was challenged in court, eventually made its way up to the Supreme Court. And just before the 4th of July holiday, which it seems like that's how bad news is announced, the Supreme Court announced that the president or administration did not have the ability to forgive debt without an act of Congress. So if you've been holding on to $10,000 to $20,000 of federal student debt in anticipation of that, you probably can move forward as if that's not going to happen. And they announced another route to try to get some forgiveness, but I don't know how it would be any more successful than the last route, but maybe just something to keep an eye on. So that's the first thing that happened, the Supreme Court ruling. And immediately after that, the next thing that was announced was a final rules for the new income-driven repayment plan. And this is, again, something we've been waiting on final rules for a while. We got some initial rules a while back. Now that basically we were waiting for the Supreme Court ruling for a lot of different stuff. So immediately after that, the new rules for the SAVE plan, the newest income-driven repayment plan, were announced. And this is going to be a really interesting tool for optometrists to use, regardless of which direction you're taking your student loan repayment strategy. And this new plan is a revision or a rebranding of the current revised pay-as-you-earn plan. And it's now called SAVE, and it's been enhanced in a few important ways. So a few of the key highlights here are: number one, the calculation for your student loan payment is going to be more favorable. They've adjusted that, and it's probably going to end up with lower annual or monthly payments. And they've done that in a couple important ways. If you understand how these income-driven plans calculate your payment, it starts with your income. You subtract out an amount, a poverty line amount based on your family size, and that's called a discretionary income. And then you multiply that by a percentage, and that kicks out your annual payment amount. So they've increased the poverty line amount that can be subtracted from your income. So less of your income is going to end up in that calculation. And then they've made a little more favorable for optometrists the percentage that you use to calculate your annual payment. So all in all, the payment amount is going to be more favorable under this new plan. The other thing that happened that's really interesting is that they've waived, if you're in the SAVE plan, they are waiving all unpaid interest. So what has happened in the past is that on other plans and even the current repay plan, if your calculated payment was lower than the amount of interest charged on your debt in that year, that unpaid interest would start to accrue on the side. It would just start to build up and build up, which made it a little more costly regardless of whichever route you went. If you were going for taxable forgiveness, that's an additional amount of debt that was taxable in the year of forgiveness. If you ended up paying your loans down to zero, well, that's an additional amount you had to pay down, and then it could often be added to your principal. So for a lot of reasons, that wasn't really favorable, right? It can hurt you in a few different ways. So with this new SAVE plan, all unpaid interest is waived, which is substantial in a couple ways, which I'll talk about in a little bit. So that's a second important update there. And then lastly, if you are married, you can now file taxes married separately and where it makes sense and exclude your spouse's income from that loan calculation, where under revised pay as you earn in the past, you could not do that. So those three highlights there are really important for making this a more favorable plan in a lot of different situations.
Sure. So to recap, as far as just the latest news on student loans, and I know, by the way, y'all, Evon's got a lot of great materials over there at his website, optometrywealth.com. But to recap here, just as far as these initial provisions go, there was a Supreme Court ruling that that dropped right around the 4th of July. The results of that kind of changing the game with regard to a lot of, I guess, some of these expirations that were coming due, but basically announcing, hey, we're going to have to get back to having some revenue here, right? You got to start paying back these student loans, right? The second big announcement there are some revisions to the new SAVE IDR plan. Again, that income-driven repayment plan. The likes of which, according to Evon, again, it's overall favorable changes to that IDR plan.
Overall, yeah.
Overall. Sure. And then that third update had to do with filing for married. If you're married, how you can elect to file to not have your spouse's income included in that IDR calculation.
Yeah. Where it makes sense that can now happen where in the past it couldn't. And that's both a tax discussion because it does impact your taxes as well as a student loan discussion. But where it makes sense, that can be a pretty substantial help here for under the new plan. And there's a timeline for how this is rolled out. So the full plan in all of its glory will be available next July in 2024. But certain important parts of it are actually going to be live now, or I guess when payments restart. And if you're on the repayment, the revised pay as you earn plan already, it's just going to automatically go into these new features into the new plan.
Fantastic. So, all right. So now we understand what some of these legislative changes have been. Now let's start to look at this from a standpoint of how it's going to impact the situation for optometrists and optometry students. Why don't you walk us through that? And specifically, Evon, if we can maybe look at it through the lens of recent grads, those that may have been out of school for a number of years, and maybe those that are still in school.
I want to mention two other things first before I dive into that. I won't go on them in too much detail, but there's two other things that optometrists should know about. Number one, if you are an employee at a healthcare system like Kaiser Permanente in California or other ones like in Texas, where you were not able to be employed by the nonprofit directly due to state law, but were employed by a for-profit arm of it. In the past, you were not eligible for public service loan forgiveness. Now, as of July of this year, you are, even for past service. Huge news for those who are impacted by it, right? So if you work at one of those employers, or if you were thinking about it, if you work at the VA and feel like there's no other nonprofit options for you, if you're in somewhere like California or Texas, you need to look at your new eligibility for PSLF. Second thing is there's this income-driven repayment account adjustment happening where they're sort of giving you really broad credit for past service or past months towards PSLF and towards forgiveness, because there was a lot of ways where you can accidentally stumble and not get credit for all those months. So that's a huge program happening right now. If you've been paying on your loans for quite a while, you should look into this. And if you need to take action, like consolidating your loans, which you may need to in order to benefit, this has to happen by the end of the year. So look into that IDR account adjustment happening. And I'll just leave it at that. If anyone has questions, I've got some content, and you can reach out to me with more questions. But let's go back to your question, Eric. Now, how does this impact optometrists at different stages of where they're at? Well, number one, if you're a recent graduate, you need to now look at this SAVE plan very seriously, regardless of which direction you're planning to take your student loans. Whether you're going to be paying it down to zero, whether you're going to go for some type of forgiveness, take a look at this, because the ability to lower your payments early on in your career and have no interest accruing, meaning there's no interest building up that you have to deal with if you change directions, is pretty substantial. Think about an example that comes to mind, and something I've been seeing recently is that you're a recent graduate. Your payments, I mean, you may not have made any payments over the last few years, and your payments may actually be based on 2018, 2019 income, where it's partial year, very low income. You can have very low payments early in your career, like the first year or two, save a substantial amount of cash under this SAVE plan, not have any interest accruing, put this cash towards a goal. Practice ownership is a huge goal. Does it make sense to build up some cash right away in your career for that, and have no accruing interest as a part of that? Or does it make sense to simply use that cash that you put into a high yield savings account and use it to pay down your debt as a lump sum? So this can be a really useful, even just a stepping stone plan to use, to where you're not really going to be penalized for using it, and you can start on an income different plan and then adjust down the road. So that's a huge lever, a tool that someone should really evaluate, rather than automatically refinancing out of the federal student loan system. I think you need to think about that decision really carefully.
Sure.
If you have been paying on your loans for a while, you should look at this as well. There have been some situations where I've seen where optometrists have been paying for even 10 to 12, 13 years already and still have a pretty significant loan balance. You need to look at this new plan, and it's likely going to benefit you. It's likely going to put you on a much clearer path, because you're already almost halfway or more towards forgiveness. It's going to put you on a much clearer path towards forgiveness. And this new account adjustment may benefit you as well. I mean, I can go on and on. I've got a couple husband and wife practice ownership teams that both have significant loan balances, can both benefit from something like this SAVE plan, and keep their loan balances, keep flexibility in their cash flow, allow them to reinvest into the practice, not have that interest accruing on the side. I mean, there's a lot of uses for this SAVE plan. So take a look at that really seriously, regardless of which direction you're going with your repayments. And I think overall, just review what direction is right for you. Because in my opinion, there's three general ways you take your student debts. You can pay it down to zero. You're just going to try to tackle it as quickly as reasonably possible. You're going to go for some type of forgiveness, either PSLF or long-term, or you're going to use some sort of hybrid approach. Just take a fresh look. Now that you've got this new opportunity, you've got loans that are restarting again. Take this opportunity to look at which direction makes the most sense for you, knowing that these updates are happening, and see what makes.
We had a brief glitch in the matrix there. For those of you just joining us, we're hanging out here on Akrinos Access with Evon Mendrin of Optometry Wealth Advisors, talking about optimizing your optometry student loan payoff strategy under the new legislation. And it's been a really great conversation thus far. If you missed the first segment of the show, please go back and check it out when Evon unpacks all the details regarding the latest Supreme Court ruling and these changes to the new SAVE IDR plan. Just wrapped up, kind of touching on some of the considerations for optometrists in different situations, whether a recent grad or someone recently out of school. Shared how some husband-wife teams are able to leverage and come together with a really great strategy to both pay off those loans and invest back in their private practice. Evon, why don't we now kind of direct it into some of these specifics of like, okay, here I am. Now's as good a time as any to think through the student loan repayment strategy. Where to start with this stuff?
Yeah, I think another glitch in the matrix. Can you repeat that one more time, Eric?
Sure. So we're
that I'm plugged back in.
Gotcha. So we're talking about, well, we're a few thousand miles away from New Orleans, and you're West Coast, Northwest,
Central California.
Central Cali. Yes. So we're talking about the key considerations of the student loan repayment strategy. So for those out there that all of this news now gets them thinking, wow, I really need to spend some time to figure this out, where do they start?
Yeah, there's a few considerations. I just mentioned the 3 routes you can take, right? Pay down to 0, go for some sort of forgiveness, or a hybrid approach where you start maybe using a income-driven plan as a tool. And I think the new SAVE plan makes that a little bit more interesting. And then switch directions. You can more aggressively pay down the road. So there's several factors you want to think about. Number one of the most important are going to be your size of federal debt relative to your income, or at least your expected income. That's going to really determine a lot of the math behind which direction makes sense. And generally speaking, I think if your federal debts are 1.5 times your income or your expected income, you should be reviewing the math towards forgiveness more seriously. It may or may not be a slam dunk. It may or may not be the right direction for you based on other factors, but you really should be evaluating the math there. Don't neglect it altogether and rush to refinance again, for example. The other things that, or I guess to build on that, if you're seeing your federal balances 2 times, 2.5 times, I mean, the higher your federal debt relative to your income or expected income, the more favorable a type of forgiveness is going to be. The other thing that factors into it is family size, because family size can impact the income-driven payments in ways that can surprise you. Larger family size will tend to lead to lower payments, which can lead to higher amount forgiven. But also, if you're married and your spouse has federal debts, that's going to impact the way these payments are calculated. If your spouse is working, that's going to impact the way that these things are calculated. It's going to impact decisions around filing taxes. It's going to impact, what state you live in, whether it's a community property state or not. So your family size, the makeup of your family, whether you're married or not, whether your spouse has federal loans or not, that definitely impacts it as well. Those are things that are going to impact the math one way or another. Your immediate cash flow needs, your career goals, your family goals, the cash flow needs of your family, like those need to be taken into account too. The desire to invest, like all of those have to be taken into account too. You don't want to dump every dollar into your student debt at the neglect of other foundational financial planning considerations. So
Sure.
your other career, family, cash flow needs need to be taken into account. And also just your feelings around debt, because you may just hate debt and it may keep you up at night and it may make you uncomfortable. And regardless of what the math tells you, you may just want to get rid of the debt and pay it down and know that it's going to be tackled on a certain time frame. And if that, you have to keep in mind your own just psychological or values around debt. Maybe in no other financial topic do values and psychology come into play than managing debt decisions.
Debt. I think it's also called leverage in the business world.
It sure is.
At least Evon?
That's right.
Oh, we had the time delay. The time delay there. Excellent. Well, man, this has been a really far out conversation here, Evon, as we've been talking about optimizing optometry student loan payoff strategy under these new legislative changes. It's been a really great conversation. So why don't we pull it all together here and share a little bit about, now, oh, and we have a comment there. Notice we had a comment come through. So Amanda Colasso, founder of Bookkeeping for Optometry, joins us here. And yeah, she makes a comment there about student loans, and definitely, comments on the degree to which she sees. Absolutely, doctors do feel the pressure. And again, hats off to you, Evon, for joining us here, bestowing some of that, some insights around this stuff. So Amanda, thank you for the comments there. So,
Good
all right,
to see you, Amanda.
So we've been talking about the recent legislative changes, Supreme Court, the new SAVE IDR ruling. We touched on the impacts that's going to have to optometrists and students at different stages of their career. Evon, if I was hearing you correctly, when we're talking about, the key considerations to putting together that student loan repayment strategy, it sounded to me like what this is really all about is it's about your financial plan, right?
Yeah.
So it's really important to not look at this in a vacuum, but to realize the interdependence of finances, right? The ebbs and flows of that. And you bring up a lot of really, really great points there, Evon. So why don't you share with folks a little bit about the work you do at Optometry Wealth Advisors and how folks can get in touch with you if they want to continue the conversation.
Yeah, first I'll just echo what you said. Like, you can't look at student loan decisions or really any financial decisions in a vacuum by itself in isolation. Your cash flow can only go a certain amount of directions. And if you put it towards one place, it's not going to go somewhere else. So you need to think about what are my priorities? What are my values? And what is the best use of my dollars in this situation? But it was great to join you, Eric. Once again, you can find me at optometrywealth.com. Check out my website. If anyone wants a student loan consultation or just wants to talk more about some of these financial topics and student loans and how it impacts all the other parts of your finances and your practice, reach out. Happy to have just a short chat. Happy to talk about any of this. Also follow along at Optometry, the Optometry Money podcast. I've got several episodes about student loans and all the updates that are going on right now. So check out my podcast. You can follow along there. And you can also just feel free to send me an email, Evon, EVON at optometrywealth.com, and find me on all the other socials and LinkedIn. And
here, there, everywhere. Absolutely. Well, Evon, thank you again for joining us here on Akrinos Access for what's been a really great conversation, really insightful conversation all around these recent changes to student loans and what that means for modern optometrists. To all of our viewers out there, thank you all for tuning in. If you're looking for more great practice management and career insights like this, subscribe to the Akrinos YouTube channel. Follow us across the socials and visit akrinos.com for a ton of really great resources. And Evon, man, have a good one.
Take care.